Ethan Cole was the kind of man who measured time in market closings and mergers, not in memories or moments. His penthouse office, perched high above the Manhattan skyline, felt more like a control center than a workplace. The glass walls, the muted chrome desk, and the ever-buzzing phone were his companions, silent, efficient, and as emotionally detached as he'd trained himself to be. But that Friday morning, as sunlight filtered through the fog city air, a name popped up on his screen that cracked the armor he'd worn so effortlessly for years. Emily Reeve. He hesitated, thumb hovering over the red icon, but then curiosity, or perhaps a lingering ghost of defiance, got the better of him. Ethan, her voice was confident, almost syrupy. Still saving the world one boardroom at a time. "What do you want, Emily?" he asked flatly, as if small talk between them was something that belonged to another lifetime. "Oh, nothing urgent. Just thought you'd like to know I'm getting engaged." The silence between them was almost celebratory on her part. She knew exactly the effect her words would have. "We're throwing a party next week," she continued, her tone dipped in condescension. "And yes, you're invited." "You always did love a show," Ethan murmured. Emily laughed cruelly. "Come on, Ethan. It's been, what, 3 years since we split, still haven't found anyone? Or are you just so emotionally constipated that no woman can stand you past a second date?" He didn't respond. Not because she was right, but because she knew how to strike. It was always like this with her power games disguised as charm. "Oh, I've told everyone you'd come solo," she added almost gleefully. "Unless, of course, you can find someone who'll pretend to be in love with you for one night." That stung more than he'd let on, and that's when the idea rooted itself. "I'll surprise you," Ethan replied, the words steady but loaded. "Good," she purred. "I like surprises." And with that, she hung up. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. Not because of jealousy. It wasn't about Emily or her fiancé. It was about control. She wanted to paint him as predictable, loveless, and incapable of connection. But for a man who lived his life closing impossible deals, how hard could it be to stage a personal one? The next morning, needing air and space away from the metal towers of Wall Street, he wandered into Prospect Park, not really expecting anything but solitude. That's when he heard it, a melody carried by the breeze. It wasn't the song that caught him, it was the voice. It wasn't flawless, but it was real. It cracked in places, soared in others. It sounded like someone had taken all the bruises they'd ever collected and made music from them. He followed the sound and found her standing by a lamppost strumming an old guitar, her tip jar half filled with wrinkled bills. She wore a denim jacket too big for her boots that had clearly walked more miles than most Uber drivers, and a stare that didn't flinch under pressure. "Nice voice," he said when she paused between songs. "I have a name too," she shot back without missing a beat. "Madeline." "Ethan," he replied. She gave him a once-over amused. "Let me guess. Corporate. Finance. Probably the guy who fires people right before the holidays." "Close," he admitted. "But I have a proposition. Not illegal, just unusual." She rolled her eyes. "That's what every serial killer says." He smiled. "I need a date. For a night. A party. You'd get paid." "Nicely." She laughed genuinely. "You look like a guy who can get a date on short notice. What's the catch?" "It's my ex's engagement party. She expects me to show up alone." Madeline crossed her arms. "So this is a revenge thing." "It's a reclaiming thing," he countered. "And you don't belong in her world. That's what makes this work." She looked at him thoughtful. "You don't want someone who fits in. You want someone who stands out." "Exactly. That's a dangerous game. It's just one night. But what he didn't expect was the look on her face when he offered to pay off her mom's medical debt. That changed everything. Her sarcasm vanished, her posture stiffened. How did you know about that I didn't? I just noticed the way you smiled when someone dropped a $5 bill into your case instead of one. She looked away. Then she said quietly, "You're serious as a contract," he said. She sighed, then nodded. "You better make it worth it, suit." Later that day, they stood in a boutique on Fifth Avenue, surrounded by chandeliers and overpriced fabrics. Madeline had tried on a dozen gowns, all beautiful, but none felt like her. When she stepped out in a forest green number, everything changed. Even she paused at her reflection. Ethan stood and said simply, "That one." She touched the leather bracelet still tied around her wrist. "This stays." He nodded. "It works." There was something about that moment, her refusal to be completely transformed, that Ethan found more impressive than any pitch deck he'd ever approved. They skipped dinner out and cooked instead. His apartment was everything you'd expect from a man who negotiated with billionaires, sleek minimalists, not a picture frame in sight. But as he rolled up his sleeves and pulled out ingredients from a pristine fridge, Madeline blinked in disbelief. "You actually cook here?" "Used to cook every night when my mom was ill," he said. "It stuck." She opened a drawer. "You alphabetized your spices efficiency," he smirked. "Okay, Dexter," she teased. They moved through the kitchen like a pair of people trying not to get in each other's way, but slowly finding rhythm. She fumbled with a knife and nearly lost a finger. He stepped in and showed her how to curl her knuckles. When she spilled salt everywhere, he didn't snap. He just laughed and wiped it up. "You don't get mad easily," she observed. "Not at things that don't matter," he replied. They ate a simple pasta dinner by the window. No wine, just water and stories. When she toasted to poverty, he clinked her glass and added, "And the thrill of pretending." But in his eyes, something deeper flickered. Subscribe our channel for more powerful stories about love, self-growth, and human connection, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next emotional journey. The night of the party arrived with a sky washed in gold and nerves that settled in Madeline's chest like birds that refused to fly away. The green dress, elegant, clean, subtly stunning, felt more like armor than costume. Her hair was swept into a soft bun, with a few curls left loose, and that old leather bracelet clung stubbornly to her wrist, like a promise to herself. Ethan picked her up in a black town car. He didn't say much during the ride, just glanced at her once and nodded approvingly, like a general assessing the strength of his ally before heading into battle. But she noticed his leg bouncing, his usual cool demeanor faltering just slightly. For all his wealth and control, something about this night had him rattled too. The venue was a ballroom wrapped in crystal and whispers. Waiters floated by like tuxedoed phantoms, trays of champagne hovering in midair. Guests glimmered under chandeliers, and every conversation felt rehearsed for an audience they could no longer see. Ethan walked in first, steel in his spine, but when Madeline followed, everything changed. Heads turned, conversations slowed. Even the pianist missed a note. She wasn't wearing diamonds. She didn't need them. She wore truth. And sometimes that's more dangerous than anything with a price tag. When they approached the center of the room, Emily spotted them. Dressed in shimmering silver, surrounded by people who laughed too loud and hugged too tightly, she turned with a glass of wine in hand, and her smile evaporated. "Ethan," she said, voice all sugar and venom, "you actually brought someone." Madeline returned a polite nod, playing the game with the same grace she'd used to balance on a tightrope. And who is this, Emily asked, her eyes running over Madeline like a scanner checking for flaws. Madeline? I'm a singer, she said with a small smile. Emily tilted her head. Subway performer or actual venues? Madeline didn't miss a beat. Subway acoustics are better than you'd think. There was laughter, not from Emily, but from nearby guests hiding their amusement behind wine glasses. Ethan watched quietly, resisting the urge to jump in, but Madeline had it under control. She didn't need rescue. She just needed space. If by quaint you mean unforgettable, she added, then yes, that's me. And that was the end of that. Later, while mingling, Madeline noticed a couple sitting quietly by the windows, hands entwined, eyes soft with decades of shared memory. As guests hovered nearby with designer handbags and plastic compliments, this couple radiated something different, something rare. She walked over gently. Happy anniversary, she said. The woman beamed. 52 years. Madeline smiled, pulled a tiny notebook from her clutch, and began sketching. A simple portrait, two faces, decades of love in their wrinkles, sketched beneath a little arch of stars. When she handed it over, the woman's hand flew to her mouth and the man blinked through glassy eyes. Ethan saw it from across the room, saw the way Madeline leaned into strangers and pulled light from them, saw the way she created something meaningful in the middle of a meaningless event. And for once, he didn't analyze it. He didn't try to explain it. He just let it be. That's rare for people like Ethan, men who fix, control, and dominate. To let something beautiful simply exist is often harder than building it from scratch. When the room grew too quiet and the background music faded, someone asked if Madeline would sing. At first she resisted. This wasn't her stage. These weren't her people. But then she stood, calm, steady, certain. A microphone was handed to her. The pianist looked up. You know Moon River, she asked. He nodded, and as the keys began soft and unsure, her voice slipped into the room like honey across velvet. She didn't belt. She didn't perform. She remembered. That's what the song sounded like, memories sung aloud. People who had only come for champagne and gossip found themselves holding their breath. Ethan sat silently. He didn't clap. He didn't grin. He just looked at her like he'd forgotten everyone else existed. And in that moment, the script flipped. She wasn't the hired help, the fake date, the outsider. She was the truth in a room full of performance. Afterward, they walked outside under a drizzle that made the pavement sparkle. You'll get soaked, Madeline said as the rain picked up. Ethan took off his blazer and held it over her. I'll survive, he said. It was such a simple gesture, but it collapsed the wall between them faster than any grand speech could have. There's something powerful about small kindnesses, especially when they come from people who never give them away. As they walked, the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was warm, comfortable, like a shared song with no need for lyrics. Can I ask you something, she said as they neared a small, worn-down building with a hand-painted sign, Marlowe's. I sing here every Saturday, she added. Want to come in? Ethan raised an eyebrow. You're inviting me into your world now. She pushed open the door. If you think you can handle it. Inside, the bar was dim and alive. A bartender nodded at her. A few regulars waved. The air smelled like bourbon and old pine. The stage was barely a step up, lit by fairy lights. She handed Ethan his now damp jacket and walked backstage. When she returned, guitar in hand, she didn't look like a fantasy. She looked like herself. And when she sang this time, it wasn't for validation or applause. It was for him. and he sat in the dark, completely still. You know, there's a real bar in Brooklyn called Pete's Candy Store, small stage, tight lighting community tables. I once watched a woman sing there after her shift as a waitress. Her voice was shaky, her guitar slightly out of tune. But she sang this one original song, and it made half the room cry. It wasn't about the pitch, it was about the truth. The lyrics were about helping her dad through chemo, about brushing her little brother's hair before school, about losing time you never knew you had. I saw suits in the back wiping tears. I saw 20-somethings dropping their phones listening for once. Music, when it's honest, changes people, even just for 3 minutes. That's what Madeline had. That's why Ethan kept showing up, not because of what she did, but because of what she made him feel. And let's be honest, most of us are starving to feel something real. Have you ever had a moment where pretending led to something unexpectedly real? Please comment below and like this video if you believe the best love stories start with honesty. Subscribe our channel now for more powerful story-based videos every day. 3 days passed. Ethan Cole was back in his glass tower, back in meetings, back in silence, back in the grayscale world, where every move is measured and every feeling is filtered. But nothing quite fit anymore. The skyline looked the same, the reports piled up the same, but something had shifted. Or maybe he had. That shift came with the quiet. Madeline hadn't called. And when someone like her goes silent, it's not about drama, it's about drawing a line. He didn't know exactly when she disappeared. He just knew that since the night she performed for him, something fragile and beautiful had been building between them. Something unspoken, unfinished, and then it was gone. When his assistant Joanna walked into the room holding a thick folder of press coverage and financial projections, she paused. "You're slipping," she said softly. "You're losing focus." "Maybe I want to," Ethan replied. She tilted her head. "You've spent your life proving you're invincible, and now you're chasing a woman who sings in dive bars and draws strangers on napkins." He didn't deny it. He didn't flinch. He just stared out the window. "People are starting to talk," she added. "Investors, board members. They say you've gone soft." He turned to face her, voice low but clear. "Good." Joanna blinked, stunned. "She's not sustainable, Ethan." He narrowed his eyes. "She's the only thing that's ever made sense." What neither of them noticed was the door cracked open, just slightly, and Madeline, who had come to return a sketchbook she'd forgotten, heard everything. Every word, especially the ones that weren't meant for her. "She doesn't belong." That's the one that hit hardest. The book slipped from her hand, pages fluttering across the hallway like leaves in a storm. She didn't wait for explanations, didn't stick around for more boardroom logic. She just left. When Ethan emerged minutes later, all he found was a trail of graphite, sketches, and silence. He called. No answer. He texted. No reply. He showed up at Marlowe's. The bartender gave a sad shrug. Haven't seen her in days. He sat in the same booth they once shared and stared at the empty stage. No one sang that night. It was almost a week before he heard it again. Her voice. He didn't expect it. He wasn't looking. He was walking through the park just like the first time, and then it stopped him in his tracks. That sound, that warmth, that ache. Madeline stood on a low wooden platform at an outdoor arts fair, her old bracelet still on her wrist, hair swept to one side, guitar slung low. She sang a ballad that wasn't about heartbreak or revenge. It was about truth, about knowing someone saw the worst of you and still stayed. And this time her voice cracked. Right on the word fool. "I thought I was just pretending for a night," she sang. But the only one who got fooled was me. The crowd was silent. Ethan stood at the back, heart in his throat. When she saw him, she didn't stop. She didn't need to, because sometimes the performance isn't for the crowd. Sometimes it's a letter to the one person who walked away. When the song ended, she walked off stage slowly, fingers trembling. And when she got close enough, she didn't say a word. She just looked at him, hurt, hopeful, guarded. "I was afraid," he said, his voice raw. "Afraid you'd realize I wasn't enough for you." Her jaw tightened. "But I was wrong," he added. "You were more than I deserved. And I let them talk me out of that." Her hand moved to her chest like she was physically holding her heart together. "Why did you let them?" "Because I spent my whole life performing too," he admitted. "Only difference is, I forgot who I was off stage." They stood there like two acts who'd finally dropped the script. Then she leaned into him, arms circling his waist, face buried in his chest. And the crowd, bless their eavesdropping hearts, applauded. But they didn't hear it, because they were too busy holding on. Months later, Madeline stood on a stage in a small community center, with kids gathered at her feet. Her voice now carried laughter, patience, and a touch of exhaustion, the kind you earn when you care deeply. She taught free music classes 3 times a week. No kid was turned away. Instruments were donated. Sheet music was dog-eared and photocopied. And what no one knew, except maybe the janitor who found the checks in the mailbox, was that every dollar came from Ethan. Never signed with his name. Never acknowledged in public. Because some performances don't need applause. They need purpose. One night, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Madeline stepped onto a tiny wooden stage again, this time in jeans and a faded flannel, her guitar strap frayed, her fingers calloused. Ethan sat in the front row, hands folded, eyes fixed on her, like she was the last true thing in a world that had become plastic. She sang a song they wrote together, not about longing or loneliness, but about stillness, about finding home in someone's quiet company. And as the final note faded into the evening air, Ethan whispered to himself, "She used to be the voice that made me stop. Now she's the reason I never want to walk away again." This story in its heart is not about grand gestures or fairy tale transformations. It's about recognition. And if you've ever been in a relationship or even a friendship where someone saw you not for your credentials or performance or profile picture, but for your stillness, you'll understand why this resonates so deeply. I remember a woman I once knew who worked at a corporate law firm in Chicago. Power suit, pristine desk, perfect life on paper. But every Friday night she played piano at a rundown jazz bar on the South Side. No one at work knew. She told me once, "That's the only place I feel like I'm not pretending." We all need that place, that person, that song. Here's the truth. You can fake success. You can fake charm. You can even fake love for a night. But you can't fake the feeling of being understood. Ethan tried to win a game his ex designed, but he found something his world never prepared him for. A woman who didn't care about winning, only about being real. And in a world addicted to applause, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is be silent and listen to the people who don't fit the room, to the voices that don't beg for attention, to the love that arrives unannounced carrying truth instead of flowers. Because when someone sings to you, not to impress you, but to remind you of who you are, you don't walk away, you stay. Thanks for staying with us until the end. If this story moved you, made you think, consider sharing it with someone who might need it today. Subscribe our channel for more powerful stories about love, self-growth, and human connection. and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next emotional journey.